Everybody who's Good morning and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited about having you here. My name is Diana Piquette and I am chair of Safe Quiet Lakes. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. We honor and thank the Indigenous peoples of Ontario, who are the original inhabitants and custodians of these lands. We pay tribute to their legacy and the legacy of all First Nations people of Canada as we strengthen ties with the communities we serve and together build the future for all Canadians. Welcome again, and thank you for joining our 12th annual stakeholders meeting, where Safe Quiet Lakes brings together industry experts and our stakeholder partners to discuss topical lake issues. I'll start by sharing our agenda for today. I think. There we go. So we are going to start with a greeting from our Member of Parliament, Scott Aitchison. And then after that, we're going to get into some brand new wake research that's has been conducted over the last 2 years in Muskoka and across Ontario. Then we're going to discuss a very topical issue right now, Float Homes Not Vessels Coalition. We'll have an update on the Decibel Coalition, marine accident statistics, life jackets, and then after having all of this sort of input into these Transport Canada consultation items, we will speak directly with Transport Canada and have a presentation on what they are looking at right now in terms of regulatory changes. So with that, I am going to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Chris Hauser. And Dr. Chris Hauser, when conducting and still conducting this.
What about the MPs?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Scott. Scott, I would like to have you start with your greetings. Thank you.
Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks, Diana. My name is Scott Aitchison. I'm the Member of Parliament for Prairie Sound, Muskoka. And before I started this gig, I was the Mayor of Huntsville and served on Huntsville Council for many years. And obviously, I'm really interested in the work that the Safe Quiet Lakes group is doing. And thank you for your leadership. We've, since getting to Ottawa, been involved a little bit with some of the work that you're working on too. Working with the Township of Georgian Bay, for example, on these floating cottages. We've been working a little bit as well with other municipalities on these aerodromes on waterfront and things like that. So, you know, the work is never done, and I appreciate all the work that you folks are putting into it. Unfortunately, I have a full day here in Ottawa with our caucus meeting that I'm going to speak to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities about housing, and then you know, full afternoon into the evening. So I can't stick around. There's going to be an awful lot of interesting stuff, though. So I'm grateful you're recording it, and hopefully you'll be able to share that with me later. But I wish you all the best. Thank you for the work that you're doing and continue to do. And thanks for having me here for a brief greeting.
Thank you very much, Scott. And thank you for addressing us every year. And I know the work that you do in Ottawa, especially on our behalf, is very important. So thank you. So now I will move to our first speaker, Dr. Chris Hauser. And Dr. Hauser has been conducting this wake research over the past few years in conjunction with University of Windsor, where he was the Dean of Science. He has just recently joined one of the largest, most prestigious universities in Canada, and he is now Dean of Science at the University of Waterloo. So with that, I pass it on to you, Dr. Hauser.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Diane. And thank you everybody for being here. So I'm going to share my screen and move it into presentation mode here. As introduced, my name is Chris Hauser, and I am the Dean of Science at the University of Waterloo. This research started many years ago, actually, at Texas A&M when I was there as an Associate Dean for Academic Affairs. And I continued as I moved on to the University of Windsor. But I am originally from Huntsville, in terms of where I grew up, and spent a lot of time on in the Parry Sound region. And it's that where I really got an interest in boat wakes and better understanding of coastal systems. Now, some of the work that we have done, just as a review for those of you who I have not met before, we started doing a lot of boat work in Savannah River in Georgia, looking at the Panamax and post-Panamax ships coming down the channel, and as well doing work on wake boats in Lake Conway in Florida. And then during the middle of the pandemic, when there was nothing else really we could do, we went to the cottage and we started to realize that, hey, what about the cottage lake? What about these fetch limited lakes in Northern Ontario? And what do we do? And this is my son this past summer learning to wakeboard for the first time. We did most of this work back in 2021 on Whitestone Lake, just north of Parry Sound, between Parry Sound and Sunridge. And our cottage is actually marked in red there. And we are right on one of the main sailing lines. And we started to look at how many wakes were coming in and what was their relative energy. And what we found during that study was that recreational boats accounted for 60% of all the wave energy in 2020, more than that of the wind-generated wakes. And we would really see it begin to spike on Canada Day, the civic holiday, Labor Day, etc., when people were up. And it had a very much a weekend-based bias towards, obviously, a lot more boating activity. But one of the things that we noticed is that reflected waves off of hardened shorelines, rocky shorelines, meant that the lake was just full of wakes all the time. And this is just a pictured cottage that's just off to the right in this one. You can see the two boats coming through, but if you look, there's a lot of other wakes in this image. And so when you account for the reflected waves off of the hard shorelines, we found that in fact wakes represented about 80% of all the wave energy. And that was a study that, again, we had done in 2020. It was published in 2021. Now, the reason for looking at this is that the potential impacts or the perceived impacts of boat wakes include damage to infrastructure, safety to other boaters and swimmers, shoreline erosion, sediment resuspension and turbidity, potentially water quality issues associated with algal blooms, as well as nuisance and disruption. And this is Lake Conway again in Florida. And here you can see their hardened shoreline. They've actually had to put in a hard shoreline. You'll watch this wake come in and it is just yanking on this dock. And they do have a lot of dock damage and they have to replace those docks on a regular basis. And so this set up the question that we were looking at as we over 2022 and 2023, as we began to expand beyond Whitestone Lake to look at the Muskoka Lakes, as well as other lakes from around Ontario. Now, the real research questions that we were asking is, how does the relative importance of recreational boat wakes vary with lake configuration and shoreline type, as well as what are the perceived issues with boating and boat wakes? So in 2022, 2023, we put sensors in across Ontario at different lakes and different configuration, different points. And then in 2023, we ran a survey of boat wake perceptions as to what impacts they were causing. The main study that was done in terms of the sensors was done by Abigail Carswell, a graduate student who is at the University of Windsor and about to defend. And the perception survey was done by an undergraduate student, Eva Casquera, also at the University of Windsor, and she ran it as an undergrad for one of her main projects. Now, some of the lakes that we worked on beyond Muskoka Lakes were Kashigawigamog, I apologize if I said that wrong, where we installed sensors across the lake. For the purposes of this presentation, I have removed the sensor location just so that people don't feel like I have actually identified exactly their properties and who is participating. As it goes to publication, we will be doing it in a way that makes sure that it is sufficiently anonymized where our sensor locations were and may continue to be in the future. The sensors that we use are simple pressure transducers that are able to measure both wave and water level variations. They were designed by an undergraduate student in computer science. His name is Ben Chittle. Normally, these sensors are about $10,000 a piece. Ben has figured out how to make them for $100 a piece, which means that we have an entire suite of these that we were able to distribute, which we couldn't have done if we had just used off-the-shelf items. We also worked in Lake Manitowoc, again, just north of Parry Sound. This is an old artificially dammed lake from the 1800s and means that you've got a lot of, in addition to rocky shorelines, a lot of very marsh and sediment right down to the water. In addition, we worked on Otter Lake, just south of Parry Sound, a very different configured lake, very long arms associated with small bays. And what we were doing in all of these lakes is figuring out when the boat wakes were coming in. This is an example of one of the sensor measurements, and it's simply a boat wake coming through. And what you get is a very characteristic signal where the water is relatively calm or has some small little wind waves before. And then you've got this very low frequency variation in the water level leading to the wake, and then the reflected waves that might come after. You do have a lot of residual waves that persist, but those are extremely small and very difficult to tell from the background wind waves. So what we did is we were able to measure on all of these lakes at about 30 some different locations. And from this, you can get more information. The type of wake that comes through depends upon the speed of the vessel, the length of the vessel, the displacement, how it's being run, the distance from the sailing line, and the type of activity that is taking place. We also, this is kind of what the data looks like. This is 2 sites directly from Lake Joseph and Lake Rosso. And you can see, and I've used this picture before, this is June 11th, 2022. You can see what the wave data would look like, and you can find these spikes of boat wakes coming through, and they have this characteristic actually up kind of inverted comma like structure to them. And so by seeing those, we're able to identify them. And once you identify them, you can extract them, you can take their energy and figure out how much energy they have versus some of the wind waves that are happening in the background. And so on this particular day, in these particular images, in the top one, wakes represented 60% of the time, but only 38% of the energy. Whereas in the bottom one, it was 24% of the time, but 58% of the total energy, where the wind waves represented the difference. And this is the data that we were extracting from all sites in 2022 and 2023. And again, I'm not going to break it down by individual sites. We're still working on how to anonymize those for publication. But here is all of the data presented, which is percent wake energy relative to the total wave energy and relative to that of the fetch length. That is the distance in front of your property, in front of a cottage. So when you look out, you have an array of different directions that you see in front of you. What we've done is we've simply averaged the distance in front of every cottage in which we did the sampling to get an idea as to what is that average distance over which the wind might blow and create waves. As well as that gives us some sense as to what would be the distance to the sailing line, which is typically halfway across that body of water, or should be at the very least. So again, the percent wake energy is the wake energy relative to that of all wave energy, both wind wave and wake energy on the lake. And what you should notice here is that wake energy accounts for the vast majority of total wave energy in 2022 and 2023 across all of our sites. And when you start getting up to some of these ones with the small fetch lengths, and I'll come back to this one, this is called Lake Rosalind, down towards Hanover. When you get down to sites like that, we're talking about wakes that are almost 4 times the total wave energy of the wind waves. Whereas we get down to longer fetch lengths, such as some of the ones I showed in the background videos from Lake Muskoka, those you're looking at almost 70% of the total energy, wave energy, is associated with boat wakes. That is an exceptionally high number, but it is consistent with the data that we collected at Whitestone Lake in 2020. That Whitestone Lake data is actually included within this figure. And so what we're finding is that obviously the wider the fetch length, or the longer the fetch length, the smaller the wake energy, and for 2 reasons. One is simply that the longer the fetch, the bigger the wind waves that can be generated. But number 2 is that the greater the sailing line distance is from the shoreline, which means that those wakes have had more time to dissipate. But even still, despite having more wind waves and despite having a longer sailing line distance, wakes do account for the greatest percentage. When you then take the scatter in the data in the top graph and look at the deviation around that blue line, we find that bays and closed environments, so this is where you are actually just in a small little lake, like Lake Roslyn, is where you've got these percent wake energies much higher above the dashed line. So these are higher than expected by the relationship in bays and enclosed areas, as well as in arms, such as an Otter Lake, where it's got these really long arms that people sail down. And what it is, it comes down to the way in which you behave. In a bay or a closed environment, there's only one thing you can do, and it's loop around. You just go around and around and around. And in an arm, you also go down, and then you come back, and then you go down, and you come back. And it's how that boating activity is done. Narrows had a much lower than expected, but one of the reasons for that is because during a Narrows, you typically have no wake zones, as well as people are transiting from one area of a lake to another. So they're not zipping back and forth constantly. They're moving in one direction. It doesn't mean that Narrows had less wake energy compared to the wind waves. It just meant that they weren't as high as would be expected. And then open sites with large open areas in front of them, including my own cottage, those are the ones that are closest to the blue line. Now, what's interesting here, and we wanted to look at whether or not boat wakes were just adding more of the same type of wave, or boat wakes were actually more energy total. And what we find, and this is going to, it apologize the way this graph is going to look here, but this open circle, darker line are the actual wind waves. On the x-axis is the wave energy. And what we find is that most of the wind waves have all of their energy at the smallest levels, whereas the boat wakes have wave energy that extends much larger, which means boat wakes aren't just adding to the wind waves. Boat wakes are substantially greater in size and energy than that of the wave energy, of the wind waves. So it's not just that we're adding more waves, we're adding substantially larger waves. And the way in which, and what we found is that at all 38 sites sampled between 2020 and 2023, there was a statistically significant difference in the wave energy between the wind waves and the wakes, meaning that wakes were a substantially higher or greater amount of energy. And we did something called a Kolmogorov-Smirnov test because there wasn't normality within the data, for those of you who are statistics wonks and wanted to know that. When we then looked across wake energy by lake, what we found is that Lake Roslyn, Manitowoc, and Otter had the greatest total amount of wake energy compared to the wind waves. But if you start looking at that, Roslyn is a circle. It's just one spot, and you can only go around in a circle. Manitowoc is all these long extending arms, and same with Otter. Whitestone and Muskoka have more open areas, and Kashigawigamog, again, apologize if I'm saying that wrong, but that is a really long, narrow section. So people are moving up and down that, but they're going at a much longer distance than some of the areas on Manitowoc or on Otter. So you're spreading out that activity. But again, you're seeing that wake energy represents the biggest component of total wave energy on all of these lakes. Now, when we start to look at percent wake time, so this is how long wakes are constantly at your dock. This is different from wake energy. Wake energy is based upon the size of the waves, the height of the waves, whereas the fraction of time in which they are hitting the shoreline is essentially how long they have spread out. As wakes are generated by a boat, they tend to be very closed up. But the further they move away from the sailing line, those wakes open up like an accordion. So the further you are from a sailing line, the more that accordion, those wakes have just simply opened up, and the longer the time in which that energy is coming towards the shoreline. It may be less energy because the wakes are smaller, but it's longer time. So what we find is in Lake Roslyn, wakes only account for about 8% of the total time during the summer. But again, they accounted for 90% of the energy. Whereas in open areas, in these open areas with 2.5 kilometer length open areas in front of them, wakes can account for about 12% of the time. But again, we're still representing 60 to 70% of the total energy. When we look at the deviation from this particular relationship, bays and enclosed areas tend to be greater, and it's simply because, again, you go around in a circle. Narrows tend to be higher simply because people go slower through those areas, whereas arms and opens tended to be smaller. And part of the reason is simply this. This is Lake Roslyn, and this is what happens, is that people just go into the bays and they go in circles. And there's really not much to the lake that you can see beyond in this picture, which means that wake boat that just went out in that Sea-Doo, which was chasing it, can only do one thing, and that is continue to go in a circle, which means it gives a lot of time of impact as well as total wave energy. It also goes to behavior. This is an example. This is from Whitestone Lake. And this is what typically happens with the Sea-Doos directly in front of my cottage. And so they just sit there and they bob. And it is fun. I will tell you that we rent Sea-Doos every year and they are fun to play with. But just look at the number of wakes in this picture. Just look at how much is there. So when we actually did the total number of wakes, what we found is that in Lake Muskoka, Rosso, and Joseph in 2022 alone, there was more than 250,000 individual wake waves that we measured. So on an annual average hour, like an hour, some of these places in Rosso and Joseph are receiving upwards of 120 to 130 individual waves coming in within an hour. Now, that may again seem surprising, but just look at the background picture here. Just count those waves. And in this background, there's over 100 waves in the photograph alone. So that tells you that, in fact, these waves are constant. They may only be there for a short period of time, but they're constant and they're persistent in terms of their energy. Now, I'm going to get to what was the perception. Lake Roslyn is an interesting case. Here, there is direct evidence based upon the shoreline development. You can see the algal bloom in this very pixelated picture. I apologize for that. Here, there is direct evidence of shoreline erosion, water mixing, sediment resuspension, and algal blooms. This lake is having being majorly impacted by boat wakes. And so this is an interesting spot. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because this goes to what we found out when we did the perception survey. We sent out that perception survey in 2023. It ran for July and August, and we had 632 responses to that survey, of which 2 were from outside of Ontario, and we did not include them in the final analysis, and about 471 that provided us complete surveys that included very detailed text that was to some of the open-ended question. When we asked people, and this is for all lakes, when we asked people, what was the biggest issue that you were seeing on a scale of 0 or 1 to 10, what we found is that, in fact, shoreline or the impact of boat wakes was the biggest problem that they were seeing. Shoreline change and modification, as well as boat noise, were still important, but to a lesser degree. And when we asked what were the top impacts on your lake, from most impactful 1 to least impactful 6, and the reason why we flip it is to keep everybody awake when they're running the survey. They have to read the question in detail to know which way the scale works. Is that what we found is that the most impactful thing that people were saying boat wakes were causing was shoreline erosion. Less so in terms of damage to infrastructure, damage to moored boats, etc. So shoreline erosion came out really big across all of our study sites. And this again represented almost 90 different lakes within Ontario. Now I'm going to focus right now on the Muskoka Lakes, from which we got 97 responses. What we actually found is that a vast majority of the responses, 66%, when we asked about what were the current and emerging issues associated with boating, as well as wakes, they noted the type of boat, their operation, and the lack of experience. Things such as ocean-sized racing boats, the design of those boats and creating noisy, they're fancy, sexy, and they appeal to a small but affluent set of people. And these are direct quotes, so I do apologize for spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes within these. One of my favorites is that reminds me of episodes of Miami Vice, and that Sea-Doo's moving too quickly and not focused on the driving, increased popularity, more wake boats, more loud noise. What you should notice here, not one thing was said about erosion, safety, or damage. And that is key to how we understand what is going on. Very few respondents in both the Muskoka Lakes and to the total survey noted issues associated with shoreline erosion, safety, and damage. And some might have said, well, there's shoreline erosion, that's fine. We got very few, even fewer, who even gave us direct evidence. So some you would get is very general environmental damage that's ruining our habitat, etc. Somebody might be hurt or killed. We're losing loons, which is a very popular answer. Accidents. But what we actually do is you get to the bottom one. The bottom one is a direct evidence of somebody who said, wakes have cost me this. And we got very few of them. This one here, we had to buy and install boat lifts to protect our boats. It cost over $25,000. And so we get into the detailed answers. This is the extent of the detailed answers from Muskoka Lakes. Our shoreline has eroded approximately 6 feet in the last 10 years. I've watched it take out sunfish nets, and around the docks, our dock is aging much more quickly. Our boats, we had to put our boats up. Our boats were swamped. We had to build a boat house to protect our boats. This was direct evidence. Not only in Muskoka Lakes, but across all 632 responses, we got very little evidence of direct evidence for it. Where we did get the most evidence was places like Lake Roslyn, which have a very shallow vegetated shoreline. What we did find a lot of is conflict and courtesy of use. Vessels are used for water play, jumping, racing, turning, held hostage, and we looked for words that were such as where you could see conflict and courtesy being a problem, lack of respect, desire for peace in a quiet lake. And this becomes important that wakes may not have a direct shoreline erosion, damage, or safety issue at every place. It does on many locations, but not at every location. But wakes are that final physical manifestation of the behavior out in the lake. So it's that reminder of what's going on there. And that came to me when I was sitting on my dock back in October, just before we pulled it, and was watching some of the boats. So conflict and courtesy is a major problem on the lakes. Where we do see issues is places like Lake Roslyn. Lake Roslyn only has about 500 meters in total width. And here what we found is very little to no wave energy in terms of wind waves. 94% of all the energy was associated with boat wakes, and it exhibited almost a perfectly diurnal pattern that only during the day did wakes come up, and you'd see the first fishing boat go out and you'd see the last wake boat coming in over the course of a day. This is an area where, in fact, there are major shoreline damage issues being done. And it's here where boat wakes only represent 15% of the time, but are 94% of the energy. So when we looked at Lake Roslyn's responses, here we got a lot of direct evidence that was associated with boat wakes, direct and indirect, stirring up the bottom. And we got a lot of people saying, hey, in this shallow water, we see a boat go through and we see that sediment being churned up and taken up to the top. We see the menace of people that they're out there and they're having an impact on water quality. On some of the lakes, and I believe it was Little Canning Lake, we had a lot of people say that the increase in boat wakes is directly tied to their increase in sedimentation along their water lines. And that's something that I don't have for today because we're still analyzing this data. 632 responses. It was a lot of data to go through, and we haven't finished it yet. But once we have the final paper, you'll see more of that information. So I'm trying to keep it short, Diana, but I'll open it up for questions here. What we have found in the preliminary results is that boat wakes represent a significant source of wave energy in fetch limit environments, representing almost 2 to 3 times the total wind wave energy. The percent wake energy in time is directly related to the fetch length, and it varies with the shoreline type. Is it a bay? Is it a narrow, for example? And we found some, but very few clear examples of shoreline erosion, damage to infrastructure, or safety. What we found is that operation, noise, courtesy, and conflict were of greatest concern, and it's in there that you start to see area issues of safety and behavior, as well as noise pollution. So one of the things that we are doing next year for further study is that we are looking for direct evidence of shoreline erosion and damage to infrastructure. So if anybody on this particular call has some photographs that they can send, we would love to see those, love to talk to you more. And I've put my email directly here. As well as we are going to be looking at direct measurement of wake impact on water quality, particularly looking at biofouling and how that might be stirring up sediment and what that might mean to water lines. And we're going to probably focus that on Whitestone Lake, where in fact I've got an opportunity to watch the sensors a little bit more closely, because we're going to spread out probably 30 throughout the lake. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing, but I'm going to open it up to any questions, Diana, and I'll let you run it. I will also put a link directly into the chat for a link to the presentation that everybody can get a copy of.
Diana, you're muted.
Hi, it's Colleen from Safe Quiet Lakes. I'm not sure, well, Diana struggles. We have a couple questions from the chat, and I encourage people to send over questions in the chat while Diana gets
Yes, hi,
unmuted.
sorry.
Oh, there she is.
Sorry about that.
One of the first questions was, did you have any demographics on the survey? Or how did that get distributed? On that one?
No, we didn't include demographics from anything from in terms of who was the respondent, in terms of age, etc. We also didn't have any demographics as to what location people were responding from. The only main thing we focused on is what lake they were on, and a little bit more information about what the conditions of their lake were. We wanted to make sure that it was anonymized, because there were some conflicting terms there, people calling out each other, which we have taken out. We didn't want to have that if the data ever got mistakenly shared. The other is, however, in the answers to the questions, it was very clear that there were demographics because people were calling out different age groups. It was quite funny.
That's wonderful. One of the other questions, and I'm not sure that there's a real answer to this, but do we know how wake surfing boats differ from regular towing boats?
So the answer is that yes, because of the design of the boat and the heavier ballast, is that those boats are producing much larger wakes, and some of the largest wakes that we measured were reaching upwards of 50 centimeters in height. So that is a wake that's about this size at the shoreline, at a distance from the sailing line. That would have been created by a wake boat. So they are creating much larger, and they're probably associated with the largest wave energies that we actually did measure. But obviously we can't see what boat is creating what wake when we are doing the sampling. What we know is just the size and the distribution of those sizes.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And there's a comment here from George Hogan wondering if Go Home Lake in Muskoka can get access to some of those measuring devices, or if you want to get involved with their lake. So I think you've put your contact information, so they can, just go ahead and talk to you directly to get that going.
Correct.
And with that, I thank you very, very much, Dr. Hauser. And the information that you've given us is really quite interesting. I mean, the fact that it's been year over year for 2 years is phenomenal. And the fact that there's such a difference in the impact of wakes based on open water narrows and in bays, and that a lot of that is based on the behavior. So very interesting stuff. And thank you very much for speaking with us today, and good luck with the continuance of your research.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right. I would now like to introduce Stephen Sprague. He is from Floating Homes Not Vessels Coalition, and this is probably one of the most topical issues on the lake right now. So thank you very much for joining us, Stephen.
Of course. Can you see my screen okay?
We can.
Good. So about 13 months ago, Georgian Bay Association and Gloucester Pool Association got together and decided that we would create a small working group to look at what now is a very controversial subject, floating homes. As such, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through some of our findings, what our plans have been and what our strategies have been, and how this group can help us achieve the goal that we're looking for. I am, as Diane mentioned, I am the co-chair of Floating Homes Not Vessels Coalition. I am also the vice president of the Georgian Bay Association, so I have a fairly large vested interest in this particular subject. Last year, whoops. All right, I have a technical issue. Here we go. Last year, we spent some time looking at some of the floating homes that existed in our area. These are examples of some floating homes that exist on the Trent Severn Waterway. What's of most note in these particular homes are three things. First of all, they're reconstituted shipping containers, which we know. Secondly, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner here, oops, sorry. In the bottom right-hand corner here, what you will see is that these are actually floated on unencapsulated foam. And you'll also see some more over here with respect to the foam that they're using to float these. But what's of most note is the fact that they use what are called spuds. And these are these metal structures here to stabilize these homes. These homes can basically stay in an area. The spuds are put down into the lake bed, obviously disrupting the lake bed and any fish habitat, but really they are for stability purposes only. So these are some of the ones that we've looked at. I did have an opportunity in the early investigation of these float homes to get in and see them, and I'll give you some additional information as we go forward. But there is a solution that exists. On the right-hand side here, you will notice that there is a float home. This is actually moored on the Trent Severn Waterway and has been moored on the Trent Severn Waterway all summer. It does include a spud. It does have a solar power for its electrical needs. On the left-hand side, what you will see is this is a float home in British Columbia. This float home is part of a float village, and I'm sure some of you have seen these. I believe there's actually some down in Scarborough as well. But these are connected to docks. They are also connected to sewage. They're also connected to water and, of course, electricity. They pay municipal taxes and are governed by municipal laws. In our case in the Port Severn area, we're not covered by any laws, and we'll talk just a second about that. The issue of float homes in Ontario is that they have a pending classification as a vessel by Transport Canada. And as a vessel, they are completely regulated by the Canadian Shipping Act of 2001 and are immune to any regulations with respect to ministries, agencies, and of course, municipalities. The implications that they pose is that they avoid or can avoid building code adherence with regards to permitting standards and approvals, avoid regulatory control with respect to location, mooring, and obviously creating navigational hazards, avoid shoreline works in relationship to boats and docks with respect to permitting and controls. And for those of us that have cottages on this call, which I assume would be most people, we all know that if we want to change our docks, we need multiple levels of approval to get a new dock in or to build a boathouse. These happen to be able to avoid all of those. They also avoid municipal taxation revenues, but yet they can consume emergency services in the municipality. But the biggest one for us was that they avoid environmental control. In the unit that I visited in Port Severn, they had a kitchen sink, they had a dishwasher, they had a shower, they had a bathroom sink, and they had a washing machine. All of those discharges can go by virtue of the fact that they are considered at this point a pending vessel classification directly into the water. But a solution is taking place. We've been working really hard to make sure that we have a solution and that we can work together. If we can get the government to agree and change the designation of these particular vessels to homes, municipalities will be able to create bylaws with respect to these homes and their waters. They can control and regulate the floating homes. At the provincial level, the MNRF has already passed regulations with respect to them camping overnight on controlled waterways. And at the federal level, at this point, Parks Canada retains control over the Trent Severn waterway, and has agreed with Transport Canada that Parks Canada can now control the shoreline works, i.e. the docks and the spuds. But we're not quite there yet. We are working hard. It's been a long, hard road for a lot of us, working at this almost daily. But there is a solution, and the solution is that it exists in British Columbia. In 2001, Transport Canada got it right. They designated and declared that floating homes are not vessels. All Ontario is asking for is the same policy. We have petitioned Transport Canada to reclassify both new and existing homes within Ontario as float homes, not vessels. We had a three-phase strategy, and the stages are working, and we are making great progress, probably faster progress than we had anticipated. We started out with a grassroots coalition. We have now engaged 40+ cottage association, 35 members of parliament, and thousands of cottagers. On the political level, we engaged Graydon Smith, who obviously has helped us with respect to stopping the mooring of these, and Stephen Guilbeault. Mayor Peter Koister from the Township of Georgian Bay is leading the political charge. And right now we're scheduling a face-to-face meeting with the Minister of Transport, Pablo Rodriguez. Phase 3, which is what we're into now, is an active response strategy. You will hear about, I assume, in the Transport Canada presentation about a Let's Talk long-term anchoring. This is something that we would like everybody to get involved with if you're so interested in it, and I'll give you a little more information in a few minutes. And we've also started a national social media campaign with respect to Let's Talk and the long-term anchoring strategy. What you can do today is you can engage the members of your Safe Quiet Lakes. You can ask them to be, if they're not already connected to the coalition, have them reach out to us. Ensure your municipality is engaged and passing resolutions stating floating homes, not vessels. Communicate this to Ottawa and Queen's Park. I live in Midland, Ontario, and Midland has just passed that they have now engaged in passing resolutions with regard to floating homes. Ensure your MP is aware and engaged on floating homes, and send your voice to Transport Canada using their Let's Talk consultation. This is a video of a floating home. This floating home exists on the Trent Severn waterway. For all of you that haven't seen these before, this particular floating home is actually being used to manufacture. You'll notice that in one scenario here, as we come around to the other side, that this floating home probably extends well over 100 feet into the water. I don't know of anybody on this call that can have a 100-foot dock. You'll also notice in the background here, all the cottages. So imagine this being on your lake. This is attached to federal land, by the way. The only stipulation on the federal land is that they have to move it 100 meters every 21 days. This particular unit has been there all summer long. So it's a big issue as far as we're concerned. And one of the things that we're working with is trying to get everybody out and using Let's Talk long-term anchoring. With respect to that, the Float Homes Vessels Coalition is really asking everyone to get involved with the Let's Talk Transportation long-term anchoring. The deadline for this consultation is December the 11th. If anybody is interested in getting further information with respect to this, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. All right, I see a couple of them coming in. Being that, sorry, I just lost you as you,
You shouldn't lose me.
no, I didn't lose you.
You should be so lucky.
I have here that, being that this is a Transport Canada, jurisdiction, done with BC in 2001, what is different that the rules cannot apply to Ontario and across Canada?
The basic information that we're getting back is that that was a special rule. It didn't apply across the country, although we're still looking for clarification on that. And hopefully we can get that clarification when Peter and the team meet with Mr. Rodriguez, Pablo Rodriguez.
Okay, that's great. I know you have been very, very active with lake associations and with CMAC and RBAC trying to bring attention to this issue. Is there something specific? I know that you said that you've got sort of some material that lake associations can use. Any other advice?
No, the only thing I can suggest to you is that we really need people to get in and get into the Let's Talk, and particularly with respect to long-term anchoring. That's what's going to make the difference. I can tell you that we have sent over 2,000 petitions to the minister. They were delivered by the MPs directly, so they weren't mailed. There were thousands of letters sent to the original minister, which I think was Alhambra. But then, of course, during the cabinet shuffle right at the peak of our emailing campaign, he got shuffled out. So we don't know that it ever met. The reason for doing all of the petitions is really so that we can get some action from Transport Canada. And I'm hoping, and we're hoping that the long-term anchoring will be the straw that broke the camel's back, which will assist us.
That's wonderful. I also have a request from someone if you are able to share your slides in the chat.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then further to that, for anybody else that's interested, we will be posting slides and a copy of the video on our website when it's all rendered. So thank you very much. Any other questions for Stephen before we move on to our next speaker?
Just a quick comment, Diana and Steve. I've put a link in the chat to a web page of ours, GBA, where you can find all the information about how to respond to the Transport Canada long-term anchoring consultation. Okay, so if anyone's interested in doing that or sharing that with their association members, etc., there it is. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Rupert. And again, this is the fun thing about being in this new format this year is that we're able to be so much more interactive like that. So wonderful. So thank you again, Stephen.
You're welcome.
And thank you for bringing very specific attention and to the problem, some very actionable next steps for people to go with. And I do know participating in RBAC and CMAC that this is just a huge issue across Ontario, and there's just an awful lot of these types of homes popping up. I am now going to move to Rob Bosworth to give us a quick update on decibel limits. Rob.
Thank you, Diana, and good morning to everyone. I'm pleased to say, with fingers crossed, that we are en route to enhance decibel limits in our small vessel regulations related to boat motor noise. The plan, according to Transport Canada at the moment, would see these come into effect in the spring of 2025. And I will remind everybody that we started this, the Decibel Coalition, in the fall of 2019. So that may have made this project a 6-year project just to get the regulations updated. There are some things we don't know. And one is we don't know how much influence there have been by other organizations. We believe that Transport Canada has been principally listening to us. I think the strength of our organization, because we are national, we have many hundreds of members, and we've had a very effective campaign, and we're also very well informed, that they have been listening to us quite significantly, but we don't know what other influences they have been hearing. In terms of, there are also the government process has two more main steps to go, and they both have to do with Gazette, which is, or Canada Gazette, which is the publication that they use for announcing new laws. So Gazette 1 will be next year, early next year, we hope. And after Gazette 1, there are still time for comments from anybody in the public. And then the final publication that we expect in the spring of 2025 will be Gazette 2, and at that time it becomes a regulation. What we don't know is what Transport Canada has decided to put into those regulations. So some of the issues that we wanted to make sure that manufacturers and operators were going to be subject to the regulation. We also don't know whether what sort of enforcement procedures that they will be recommending. We have recommended that there's 3 SAE standards that are well accepted around the world. They recognize that, but will they put them in at the end? We don't know, and we won't see that until Gazette 1. What we have learned and gained experience on in this soon-to-be 6-year program is that we now have a quite deep understanding about how Transport Canada works, particularly with respect to small vessels. This is knowledge that we are finding very useful as we endeavor into our new challenges. We have a strong and respectful relationship with Transport Canada. I think that's based on the fact that we base our requests on science, and we have strong public support for them. The Decibel Coalition has become a national brand or nationally recognized organization, which has broadened the scope of Safe Quiet Lakes as well. We've learned to work with media and politicians, and we've learned the importance of being properly funded if you want to be able to get the message out and follow through with both the politicians and the media. So we're very encouraged where we are. We believe that we will get most of what we've asked for. However, that is really only phase 1. Phase 2 is we need to roll this out across Canada. So you can't expect the law to go in place and all of a sudden everybody's going to comply with it. There's significant communication that has to be done. We need to work with our enforcement agencies such as the OPP and the RCMP. And the answers are different depending on where you are in Canada. Many of the provinces of Canada are policed by the RCMP. Their funding model is very different than what we have in Ontario. And their extent of marine services that they have is quite a bit less than what we have in Ontario. Ontario were mandated by law, or the Police Act, to have a marine service. And I know, excuse me, Sergeant Moffat will be talking about how many vessels he has around Ontario, but one might call it a small navy. So we're blessed in Ontario to have, well-trained, extensive police presence on our waterways that cannot be said for the rest of Canada, which makes it a challenge for particularly our friends in BC and Saskatchewan, Alberta, and New Brunswick, because they've got a longer process to go through to be actually get police vessels on the water to deal with this issue. So that is really our next phase. We will start working on that next year, 2024, as we get ready for the rollout in 2025. And that will be the start of starting to see the difference on our lakes. So that's where we are, and I'll stop for any questions.
I do not see any questions, but I will say that you have done a fantastic job with the coalition, you and your co-chair, Nancy Couture, and we see all sorts of great things happening. We're looking forward to seeing what will be released in Gazette 1, but you've made some amazing strides. So thank you very much to both of you and to the coalition.
Well, there's a very strong, dedicated team that's been at it for a long time, and we still got lots of energy left, so we'll keep going.
All right, thank you. So we are now on to Sergeant Dave Moffat to lead us through some Marine statistics and what they've been doing over the past year. Dave Moffat, I think everybody has known him. He's just been a stellar part of our community over the last many, many years. And thank you for joining us today, Dave.
Good morning, and thank you so much for the invite again, Diana. It's such a pleasure talking to your group. I try to keep a close contact with you, obviously, because everything you do in this seminar has been amazing information. So, Professor Hauser and the Float Homes Not Vessels Coalition and the Decibel Coalition, what fantastic work you all done. And I know that Rob knows this from the Decibel Coalition. We are really trying to work with the Transport Canada, and try to get them to understand that enforcement has a big role in the Canada Shipping Act 2001, and we are moving forward really well. We have great friends with the Office of Boating Safety and with Transport Canada itself. So anyway, it's been a great ride, so to speak. So I will give basically my information on Ontario. And so anyone that's seen my presentation before, it's not too much differently. I've just updated the stats, and like Rob's notion that we have a small Navy. God, I've never heard that before, so it's kind of interesting. But yes, we do have a lot of vessels. We have 152 vessels that are across the province. And I think we are the only force in Canada, I think the RCMP might help out a bit, but we do have a training fleet to train our partners in Ontario, as well as the OPP and the MNRF and municipal forces around the province. Currently, we have just under 380 Marine officers, and we do patrol just under 100,000 square kilometers of water, which includes a lot of the Great Lakes. So this is our enforcement over the last year, 2023 to date. You can look at the numbers, and they're pretty close to what we've done before. Our vessel stops are up. We have a real dedicated group across the country, or across the province, that are very passionate about making our waterways safer, and to try to spread the word about shared waterways and being courteous. And the professor was talking about that, and it's such a big issue in Ontario, that we're trying to let people know that you want to enjoy the water one way, other people want to enjoy it the other way. We have to find a common ground. With all these stats, we see that we have just under 16,000 hours behind the helm. So this is our general stats over 10 years. You can see on the left, the age of the deceased victims. They're all over the map. But you also see at the bottom that youth are not the problem here. That 2.4 of our fatalities are youth. And if we look at our fatalities and life jackets, I think everyone's heard me talk about this, but life jackets are the main cause. And we have to look at the big, broad spectrum and not just the youth. Time of day we have, 92% are males. Impaired is a very small percentage of our fatalities. And our top three reasons: capsizing, falling overboard, and collisions with vessels. So in the last 13 years, this is our fatality study. 312 people we've lost in our marine fatalities in OPP patrolled waterways only, doesn't include our municipal partners. This year we have lost 23 people, which is lower from the last 3 years, which is fantastic. However, it's way too many. As far as the number of life jackets, people wearing life jackets, this year, like, it's down. It's 73%, 74% that are fatalities of not wearing life jackets. So in a way, that's a win. But I hate to say that, because again, it's way too many people. So if we look at the big picture in the last 13 years, we have almost 87% of our fatalities are people that aren't wearing life jackets. So if we break down our fatalities, we have categories that we collect. And the biggest one that you can see here is people just falling overboard. Doesn't involve collisions. It is just people falling overboard, and also vessels capsizing, like falling. The vessel overturns like a canoe or kayak, small fishing boat. The way it's driven, it could be a larger boat, but it is falling overboard, capsizing, and the last is the collision, which is just 8%. But if we look at our injury collisions, and our PIs are personal injuries and PDs are property damage collisions, we have 391 that have been reported to us in the last 9 years. Remember that there is no reporting, mandatory reporting in the Canada Shipping Act 2001. So these are people that just feel they have to report they had a collision with their vessel in some way, or an incident with their vessel in some way that the police should have been notified. And you can see a very big difference here that in our PIs and PDs, 286 or 73% of collisions are with collisions of other vessels or objects. Could be rocks, could be logs in the lake, could be islands, etc. The next big category is just falling overboard, running aground, and other, and you're going anywhere from just under 7% down to 4%. And so it's a big transition between our fatalities and our PIs and PDs. And my opinion, I've been a collision investigator for a long, long time. My opinion is there's it's milliseconds between the two events. So we need to do better, especially when we're looking at collisions with vessels and objects. We need to do better about operating our vessels on our waterways. And then the last category is around the 1 or 2% with flooding and swamping and sinking, etc. So we look at the big picture with our fatalities. In 2023, falling overboard consists of 12 of our fatalities, which is 52%, capsizing 39%, and we only had 2 collisions this year, which is fantastic. But again, I'm just floored about our fatalities, that they need to be down to 0. So if we look at length of vessel, and I do this every year in the last 10 years, so I'm jumping around about the number of years that we collect this data, and it has to do with our data source that we have at the OPP. We can say that in the last 10 years, we've had 268 fatalities compared to the 13 years I just showed you. And it involved 87% or 232 incidents involved vessels 6 meters or under. And I can tell you, all of our incidents this year involved vessels 6 meters and under. Vessels over 6 meters, just about 8%. And then vessels, we're still trying to figure out what size they are. It's down about 5.6%. So if we look at the big picture for us in the last 9-year study, motorized, canoe, kayak, PWC, SUP in that order, as far as the number of fatalities. And you can see it is the exact same order this year. So it is still continuing. The motorized world, we had 9 fatalities all the way down to, we had 1 in a SUP, a stand-up paddleboard, and 1 in a rowboat. So if I take these fatalities, and I've got a couple occurrences to note and to try to explain to you when I get called about these investigations, or when I learn about these investigations and read the reports, this is the stuff I learned about. These are about our fatalities. So we had 2 collisions. We had a small fishing boat hit a kayaker from the stern. PFD was used. However, that's still in the courts, so I can't talk about it. We had 2 rented PWCs that collided, which resulted from 1 person deceased. Again, still in the courts. A canoe. So 3 incidents. These are not total. These are just some I picked out. So we did have a handful of canoe incidents. One was went out fishing and did not return. We did locate the deceased with his arm through a life jacket, which tells me that the life jacket was not worn at the time, and it probably fell out of the canoe when he capsized the canoe. A canoe that capsized with 2 people. One made it to shore, the other one didn't. No PFD worn. Capsized in cold water. Found 2 deceased on shore. No PFDs worn at all. We're looking at motorized vessels. We had an incident where a PWC was operated with a young daughter on the back. Both fell off the PWC, and father struggled to keep his daughter above water, and he eventually drowned, and his daughter did have a PFD on at the time. Traveling at a high rate of speed, we had a vessel that's flipped, and a operator deceased, and the high rate of speed, it wasn't a big area, big water body, so it wasn't an issue of driving dangerously. It's a boat that was designed to travel at a high rate of speed, and a gust of wind caught underneath and flipped the boat. We had a fishing boat that we found, it was out of control doing donuts. We had people stop the boat, I think, by throwing a towel or a rope in the water. They found the operator found was deceased. He wasn't wearing a PFD. And then the last one was he fell off a PWC, and this person did not surface, and strong swimmers. So a lot of these people in here, granted, there are some people that are non-swimmers that made the choice of not wearing a PFD, but there are many occurrences of people that are fair to very good to very strong swimmers that are deceased because they entered the water. And then the last one is about a stand-up paddleboard. This male saw someone operate a stand-up paddleboard by shore. He asked if he could borrow it. He jumped on board. His friends told him, wear a PFD, wear a PFD. He said, I'm fine, I'm a good swimmer, no problem. He fell off on a very shallow water, jumped back on, he went out a little farther, fell off, and the SUP pushed away from his body, and we recovered him later, wearing, of course, jeans and not ready for doing that activity. So the last thing I want to say, and I'll always say this, it is continuous. It's every report I read. And granted, this year we're wearing more life jackets, but every report I read, like, please wear your life jacket. And again, I said the word please, and I mean it. Please wear your life jacket. It can mean between life and death. And we have a beautiful province with lots of wonderful water and rivers and waterways, and you can really enjoy it, but protect yourself. Anyway, I didn't want to step on the toes of my friend John Gullick, who's coming up next, and my other friend Don Calhoun from the Office of Boating Safety. We are very involved with Transport Canada and trying to get some regulations looked at and changed, and with my two stakeholder partners, Transport Canada and Canadian State Boating Council and the Canadian Power and Sail Squadron. We are trying to move through this. So that is my presentation. If anyone has questions.
Thank you very much, Dave. And wow, interesting statistics, and especially getting all of the details about the fatalities and what you were able to share with that. I think there are two comments so far. One of them is great updated information. Thank you, Dave. Another one is, can you share regulations that you would like to see changed by Transport Canada?
There's things that we're working on, and I don't want to step on Don's shoes at all. We are working on trying to get more enforcement powers throughout the Canada Shipping Act. And the problem is it's a federal act, and yes, we are in Ontario and we have a huge amount of water. However, sorry, I'm just trying to turn off my, can you turn off my sharing, please? I can't quite figure that out. We are trying to get the police more authority with commercial vessels, which means, the vessels that the barges, the vessels that are going across to build docks, etc. We need more authorities for that. We're trying to get more authorities for removing vessels off the water, because that's a Transport Canada thing. So we are working very closely with Transport Canada. We put together a coalition, a committee across the nation of all enforcement officers, and we're building that strongly every month. We're getting more and more people to help us out. So anyway, it's going great. I can tell you honestly that our relationship with Transport Canada has never been better, and I commend everybody over there, and they do such a great job. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for the future.
Thank you so much. I have a couple of other questions for you, Dave. One of them is, where can we get copies of booklets and information on boating safety?
Of Great question. So there's a booklet that Transport Canada puts out. It's called the Safe Boating Guide. And I refer to this as the Bible to safe boating. If you read this, you will have a lot of the information that you need to be a safe boater, a courteous boater, and talk about the shared waterway piece, right? So that's the Canada Shipping Guide. Sorry, that's the Safe Boating Guide, and I will put that link in the comments.
Okay.
The second one is about commercial vessels, and that's the small commercial safety guide. Small vessels safety guide. So I will put that in as well.
That's fantastic. And another question, do we have any situations of swimmers being struck by a boat or a marine craft? And I think there was one last summer, so.
We've had in the last, I've been doing this job for almost 6 years, or actually over 6 years, and we've had two, and we had that unfortunate incident on Lake Rosso last year. I'm really trying to push the understanding that our waterways are changing with the number of people we have and the number of vessels that are out there, and you cannot for a second take your mind away from operating that craft. Operating a boat is not easy, and we need to make sure that we have a proper lookout and we're very sure of the surroundings around you. And hopefully that's going to solve some issues. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to be is needed for the recreational boating world.
I totally agree. And I have to say, I've been with experienced boaters sometimes, and because of being in so many presentations with you, I will, make a comment about, oh, did you see 2 o'clock? There's a boat coming. And I've had some experienced boaters at the helm say, hey, I got this, almost as if, I'm making the insinuation that they're not under control. And then I repeat your message, which is every person on that boat has a responsibility to look out. There's just so many things happening on the water that you really just can't expect that the driver's going to do it all by himself.
Right, and it's interesting because my wife's a police officer, and when we drive, I do most of the driving road together, and she will always let me know, watch out for that stop sign or whatever. And that stuff's not done in the water, and I welcome it. Let me know. I welcome it. And driving a boat's not easy. We don't have lines. We don't have stop signs. We don't have stop brakes, right? We don't have lights that tell us what to do. It's all about the operator. And if we have more eyes on the water, we will be much safer when we're operating our vessel.
Absolutely. I have one other question. If we have an increase in specific regulations, will OPP be able to monitor our waterways more? And perhaps as in addition to that, would you get more resources?
Very good question. We are right now trying to, our fleet is aging, and we are right now trying to increase our fleet and increase the number of vessels we have on the water. That all comes down to the provincial government and what we can do with that. So we are doing a great job right now trying to get more staff. We are very understaffed because of retirements and PTSD, etc. And we are doing an amazing job trying to get more people. So I am hoping that's going to be a thumbs up, and hopefully that in the near future we will have more people on the water and more vessels for sure. I can't promise anything. That's just me kind of rubbing the crystal ball.
Wonderful. Thank you. And again, thank you very much for your presentation and for all the help and leadership that you give us. And I know you went very quickly by the coalition that you've been building. And, that might be something a little bit more technical than other people need to know, but it is absolutely critical to some of the things that you're trying to impact from a Transport Canada level. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it.
All right. And now I am going to move to John Gullick, who's a partner in following up on a lot of the messages that Dave had. And John Gullick is with Canadian Power and Sail Squadron. So thank you very much. And I pass it on to you, John.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. Thanks very much for the past presentations. It's really nice to be part of this and to have a few minutes. My comments today are based on an article that I sort of wrote just before and following the Standing Committee on Recreational Boating at the most recent CMAC meetings held in Ottawa on November the 14th. A good part of the article actually refers to comments given at the standing committee by Jeffrey Tasker about where the federal government is at on mandatory PFD wear at this point. And I'm presuming Don is going to refer to that, so I'm not going to. Also, some of the stats that were in mine, Dave has already referred to, so I will try to not refer to those again. Just in terms of Ontario, what's happening here in Ontario, in July it was announced on the news that the Ontario government set to pass a new bill that will make it mandatory for children aged 12 and under to wear life jackets on boats that are under 9 meters in length and underway. Parents, guardians, or other supervising adults 18 or over could be subject to a fine of up to $200 plus expenses if they do not comply. So within that, we're yet to see what the definition of boats will be. Will that include all vessels, power, sail, or human powered? Or will the definitions be somewhat limited? How will a bill be enforced? Or will enforcement officers just use it as an opportunity to educate and warn at this particular point? And currently, we know under Canadian law, every watercraft must carry a PFD or life jacket that's in good condition with appropriate size and readily available close at hand for every person on board. So when Sergeant Dave comes and says, show me your PFD or life jacket, and I hold up my inflatable, which we'll see behind me, Sergeant David will tell me, sorry, I want to see your PFD or life jacket. And when he's asked me that question a few times and I'm still holding my inflatable, it will become evident that inflatables are actually only approved if they are worn. And that has been in effect for a number of years. So already, at least when it comes to inflatables, there is mandatory wear requirement. And we are beginning to see now those who produce life jackets and PFDs throughout North America, at least for sale and use in North America. We're beginning to see more inflatables and combination of inflatable and inherently buoyant life jackets. So the two components are found within the same PFD. And in that case, if there's an inflatable component in the PFD, it must be worn. So that's already there. It should be noted that recreational vessels fall under federal jurisdiction. We've already talked a little bit about that. So there'll probably be some confusion around a provincial requirement if it comes into effect. It should also be noted that Transport Canada's Office of Boat Safety is in the process of considering a mandatory PFD life jacket requirement. And I'm sure Don is going to talk about that. So I'm not going there. When the Ontario government was seeking public input, among others, the Canadian Safe Boating Council, Life Saving Society, the Ontario Provincial Police submitted research, statistics, and recommendations. They have also provided the same information to Transport Canada in support of Transport Canada's own research, recent research on the subject. So, a lot of the data, data that Dave presented, data that was collected by Transport, the OPP, and all those other organizations, and data that has been collected by the U.S. Coast Guard in the United States. It's amazing over the last 20 years how consistent that data has been. I mean, it's within percentage points, and as I say, very consistent. And Robert talks about decibel work having taken place over the last 6 years, and they're moving towards what hopefully will fall into place with Gazette 1 in 2024 and Gazette 2 in 2025. We're hoping that the same may take place with any requirements for mandatory PFD and life jacket wear. But we've been working, the Canadian Safe Boating Council, at least, has been working on this effort for over 20 years, and we're at much the same point. Don will talk about next steps, I'm sure. But I'm just going to close with a couple of comments. It's my own opinion and that of the Canadian Safe Boating Council, and it has been this opinion for a long time, that is clear from the data collected over many years that mandatory PFD and life jacket wear should be required for all boaters on all vessels less than 6 meters in length while on deck and underway. Okay, there's a lot of considerations that are being proposed in the Transport Canada upcoming, Let's Talk Transportation. And again, I would suggest, I think will be coming out next month or shortly thereafter, and will be up for public comment for 60 days. So please take the opportunity to make those comments. Just as I've done many times in the past, I'll ask you to consider these 5 points, not just related to PFD and life jacket wear. While boating, wear your PFD and life jacket. I can't support Dave's comment, more. It's a key comment for promoting boating safety, across the country. Don't drink. Take recreational jugs and boat. Carry all the required safety equipment and ensure that it's in good working order. Take a boating safety course, either online or potentially in a classroom. Certainly, there's a lot of stuff available now online. And consider the effects of surprise cold water immersion. And Dave has talked about cold water immersion in the past, and it's amazing when we talk about cold water how warm the water actually is when we consider it to be cold. And as I have always said, in Canada, the water begins to warm up on about July 15th, and then it cools down again on July 16th. So we're always dealing with cold water. So be aware and wear your PFD or life jacket. And that's the end of my comments for this morning. Thank you very much.
That is wonderful. Thank you very much, John, for your finish, especially the 5 basic safety points, and then going through some of the interesting new types of floating devices and life jackets and PFDs, and how much easier they are to wear now and get access to. Now, I did get a specific comment asking if you could just give us a few more details on the proposed bill and the timeline, wording, et cetera. And I believe that this is around the mandatory life jackets for children in Ontario.
I found that information online, and it was the only information I found was the press information, the press release that the Ontario government presented in July, I think it was. I'll see if I can dig that out, and I'll pass it along, for distribution.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I think a lot of people would be interested in that. And I have a comment from someone saying that you can find Transport Canada amendments section. It's there with some light Googling, but we'll get some more specific information out there. So once again, thank you very much, John. And while you were talking, you referenced Canadian Safe Boating Council. And I know that I introduced you from Canadian Power and Sail Squadrons, but I know that an important thing that you also do in our community is sit on Canadian Safe Boating Council, which does some amazing things and keeps us reminded on how to stay safe in the water.
Thank you.
All right, so now we're going to bring it all together. We have Don Colquhoun from Transport Canada, and Don is the lead for Transport Canada in Ontario and represents not only the national interests of what's going on with Transport Canada, but is our lead in Ontario. And she is going to run us through a number of different regulations that are under consultation right now, some that were covered in our meeting to date and some that have not. And we will have a QA for Dawn at the end. So again, thank you so much for joining us, Dawn. It's always such a pleasure to have you here, and I leave you to it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Diana. So let's jump right into it. As Diana said, I'm the manager of the Office of Boating Safety for Ontario Region, and I'm just going to go through some changes here in the regulation. And my screen doesn't want to change. Doesn't it always happen? There we go. So what I will be covering the next 15 minutes are some changes to the vessel operation restriction regulations, the small vessel regulation amendments, and touching on floating homes. I'm sorry I don't have any pretty pictures in my presentation, but it's dry regulatory matter, but I'll just do the best I can to keep you engaged. So the VOR, forgive me if I say VOR, it's just shorter than trying to say vessel operation restriction regulation. So the VOR 2021 package, I actually presented on at this meeting last year. So that package has come to a completion. The submission is currently in the approval stage and is targeting publication in Canada Gazette 2 in late December of this year or early 2024. When a regulation is published a proposed regulation is published in Canada Gazette Part 2, it becomes law at that time. So when we say it's being published in Canada Gazette Part 2, that's it. It's completed, it's law. If you have any questions on the content of it, I've just put it down in the slide, but I'm not going into it. Like I said, I've spoken to this before. By all means, you can ask me some questions at the end of the presentation. So the VOR 2022 proposal is what we're consulting on presently, and consultations close December 11th of this year. Transport Canada recognizes that the process to put a restriction in place is lengthy. It takes almost 2 years, at least for VORs, not 6 years like it did for the decibel regulation and 20 years for mandatory wear. But, 2 years is still a long time. And we recognize that fact, and we are looking to speed up the process. So we have some proposed intended changes, and which we are consulting on, and we really would like the public's input on this. One of them is incorporation by reference to modify the VOR schedules more quickly. So how is this going to help? So basically, when a municipality or a local authority applies for a restriction, they have to apply against one of our schedules that is in the VOR regulation. So if, for example, speed limits is under Schedule 6 in the regulation. Anything in the regulation that needs to be changed has to go through the lengthy regulatory process. So what they are talking about here is to remove the schedules from the regulation itself, put it into a separate publication. And all the regulation will say in the regulation will say is, you must follow the dictates of so-and-so publication that contain the schedules. So when it goes time to changing the schedules for an added restriction or whatever it happens to be, you can do it quickly in that separate publication, while at the same time, the regulation says you must follow the dictates, so that new restriction will become law very quickly, because it does not have to go through the entire regulatory process. I hope that's clear as mud. The second point is to give the minister powers to issue ministerial orders for implementing restrictions on pleasure craft activities not currently listed in the VOR, or anything that's really urgent. So this is a temporary measure. The minister can issue a ministerial order, which will be good for up to 2 years, while the proposed restriction goes through the regulatory process. Again, we are looking for comments on this. I have given our website at the bottom. It's Let's Talk Transportation. All consultations will take place on that website. So if you just take a picture of the slide, you'll be able to get to it easily enough. Mandatory wear of PFDs. We have public consultation coming up soon in early spring of 2024. In January of this year, a letter went out to boating organizations and enforcement agencies, just seeking some preliminary feedback on proposed criteria. That was not intended to be a full public consultation. That is still to come. We only sent this out because we were looking for some feedback, preliminary feedback, so that we could refine our proposal before going public. So I urge you all that when this comes out, to please have your say. The naysayers will definitely say a lot. So anybody that supports it, we need you to definitely get on and have your say. I will be sending out a link to Diana, to the Safe Quiet Lakes, as well as to many cottage associations when the link comes out. So we will publicize it as far and wide as we possibly can. So engine cutoff switches is another proposal with consultations conducted earlier this year in about April and May. We are proposing that engine cutoff switches be installed on new builds. So they have to be less than 8 meters, have an engine that can produce at least 3 horsepower in total, have a primary helm station that isn't in an enclosed cabin. And we will also require operators to connect themselves to the engine cutoff switch if they have one, and if their vessel meets the descriptions listed above on this slide. So, and remember, it's only for new builds, so older boats may not have one. So when we did the consultation, what we heard was that 69% of the people that responded supported the proposal. They said that, it would be beneficial in preventing injuries and fatalities. It should be required on all vessels, regardless of size, and definitely needed to mitigate risks for high-speed craft. And they brought up a good point that many of the new builds already have these installed, so it wouldn't be burdensome on manufacturers at this point. About half noted that it should depend on the length of the vessel, or the type of and design of the vessel, or the activity that the vessel is involved in. And some felt that wearing of the cutoff switch should be voluntary, or maybe only required if they're operating alone. We always have naysayers, but in this case, there weren't that many. They thought it might be unnecessary and could result in more safety issues. Regulatory overreach, we get that a lot, and that it would be difficult to enforce, and that there's not strong enough justification for introducing these requirements. However, this is the timeline for engine cutoff for the proposal for the cutoff switches. So fall 2024 is the targeted publication in Canada Gazette Part 1. Whenever a proposed regulation goes into Canada Gazette Part 1, there's always a consultation period following that. So it could be 30 days, it could be 60 days. So you still have an opportunity to comment on this when it goes into Canada Gazette 1. Targeted publication in Canada Gazette Part 2, when it becomes law, is the spring of 2025. And pleasure craft licensing. So just to refresh your memory, because I've spoken to this before, we're talking about decreasing the validity of the licenses from 10 years to 5 years, a $24 fee to process the applications, require all pleasure craft above 6 meters, regardless of horsepower, to be licensed, excludes human powered, but includes wind powered. And it will, of course, continue to include all vessels that have a motor of 10 horse or more, as it does right now. And all PCL, all pleasure craft license holders should notify Transport Canada of an address or name change within 30 days. Presently, it's 90 days, so we're shortening that time. Basically, this is because to protect the integrity of the data. With the longer time period, our data is not that accurate. We're looking to have more accurate data. And also it allows for easier cancellation of a pleasure craft license by Transport Canada. So support for the proposed regulations was received from a few enforcement agencies and industry stakeholders, but the majority of the comments received from the public opposed the regulatory process, with many noting that the current licensing system is sufficient. The opposed was mostly because of the fee. Many people thought that the fee was too high and they did not want to pay it. We expect that this proposal will be published in Canada Gazette 1 by the fall of 2024. Changes to propeller-driven surfboards. As it stands right now in Canada, operating a propeller-driven surfboard type vessel is illegal all over Canada. However, industry and Canadians at large have been very vocal in their support for Transport Canada to revisit this prohibition. So based on all the feedback received, we did conduct consultations back in May, and we are proposing some amendments to the small vessel regulations, which would introduce a definition, first of all, for what a propeller-driven or power-driven surfboard vessel is. We are looking to introduce requirements for the operators, like wearing a life jacket. We're looking to introduce some construction requirements, like having the cutoff switch and propeller guards as needed, and of course, other safety equipment requirements. We're expecting this to be published in Canada Gazette 1 by fall 2024. And again, you can comment when it goes into CG1. So the requirements for engine exhaust noise emissions for pleasure craft. Like Rob said, that this took a long time. I mean, it took a lot of work. Any regulatory proposal, Transport Canada does not make regulations arbitrarily. We always have to consult. We always like to hear from the public. And as Rob would tell you, that he probably made presentations at National CMAC over and over on this. When you are looking to make a change to a regulation, when you are looking to suggest changes to regulations, that is the venue that you go to. You need to go to National CMAC or even the regional CMAC and talk about what needs to be changed. Get on the agenda and make your voice heard. It may take a long time, but it will happen. So based on everything that we've heard and looking to harmonize our decibel limits with those in other jurisdictions, namely the US, and support our field enforcement measures, we're looking to introduce requirements for manufacturers and importers of new pleasure craft to ensure, first of all, that the vessels are compliant with the ISO standard. And then introduce further requirements for the pleasure craft not to exceed a set decibel limit. That's all I'm going to say about it right now, but that link that I've given at the bottom or on our Let's Talk Transportation, it goes into a little bit more detail that you can read on there. For the timeline, we're looking for it to come into force by the fall of 2025. So we will consult again before that when it goes into Canada Gazette 1, and that we're looking at in the end of 2024. Floating homes. And thank you to Steve for his presentation on this. We can truly appreciate all the concerns. We are very well aware of the concerns of Canadians regarding these vessels. We do have consultation on long-term anchoring ongoing. And again, I cannot stress enough, please do have your say. I can remember one instance of a regulation being totally squashed because we didn't have, we knew we had the support, but we didn't have it in writing. People did not comment, while the naysayers were all over it. So when we send this up to Treasury Board, they will not go forward with it. We need to have your support. So please do get on. Don't wait for your friend, your neighbor, your other boating coalition to do it for you. You need to get on there. You need to have your voice heard. And for the purpose of this consultation, long-term anchoring means that a vessel it anchors in a single location for an extended period of time over a number of days. It doesn't include an overnight stop or short periods during a ship's voyage or an unoccupied vessel in a designated area to store the vessel while it's not being used. This is long-term anchoring, and that we're looking to lay some restrictions on. So Transport Canada does recognize these floating accommodations as vessels because these can navigate on their own or under tow in the on the water and can be anchored offshore. There is a little bit of a difference for the ones in BC, and the ones in BC have been defined, and I'm going to read to you. In the standards for float homes and liveaboard vessels in Victoria Harbour, or in the equivalent British Columbia float home standard, these are intended to be used in a protected location within the harbor, such as a marina, while moored to a dock or a pier, with direct walkway access to the pier or shore, dependent on shore services, example, water, waste, sewage, electrical, and thus are not able to navigate. As such, these would not be considered vessels and are not regulated under the Canada Shipping Act. Now, we may have a few of those types in Ontario as well. On a case-by-case basis, we would not recognize those as vessels, but those, and you'll read it in my slide, floating accommodations that can navigate on their own or under tow on the water can be anchored offshore are considered vessels. So again, I urge you to please have your say, and we look forward to hearing from you. If you're looking for more information, you can contact us at the Office of Boating Safety. At that link, you will also find the Safe Boating Guide at that link. And thank you for Dave for putting that in the chat as well. You can email us. You will get a response within 24 hours, I can guarantee you. Maybe not in the peak of summer, because we get could be over 100 inquiries a day. But generally speaking, 24 hours, you will get answered, or you can call us toll free. Do you have any questions for me? You're on mute, Diana.
I'll unmute. Thank you very much. I have one question, and it's in regards to the time frame for the consultation. I know that it's currently about 60 days, and the comment was this is sometimes a little bit short for municipalities and other people that have sort of a longer cycle. Sometimes they have meetings only monthly, and by the time this gets onto their agenda, they don't always have time to get a full response. Do you have a comment about that?
So that can be changed. We can go anywhere from 30 days to 90 days, but we need to know from Canadians that they are looking to have more time to comment. And sometimes when the consultation closes, we still accept comments through email. We never say no. So if you think you're a little bit late, just email me. And I can get you connected with the right people in headquarters.
Okay, that's wonderful. Now, somebody asked the question, are we talking about the wake surf amendment? And I know that's for 7.
Yes, that was the 2021 package, and I didn't go into the details because I had spoken to it last year, but I recognize that maybe not everyone that's here today was here last year. So the Schedule 7, it prohibits all towing sports on certain bodies of water, time of day, whatever it happens to be. We get the most complaints on wake surfing alone, not all towing sports as a whole. So if they apply for a restriction against Schedule 7, it will prohibit all towing sports in that area. So we wanted to create a separate schedule just for wake surfing. So if that's what they want to prohibit, they can apply for that under that separate schedule.
Okay. And I'm not sure if this is the same question, it's an add-on to it. Can we touch on the feedback or information on amending section 7 to 7.1? And can we look at increasing distance from shore? And I gather that means for all towing as opposed to just it separately from the wake surfing.
I would have to go in and look at what we have for Let's Talk on Let's Talk Transportation. We usually publish what we heard on there. So I will look it up and send you the link on that because I don't remember off the top of my head. Sorry about that.
Okay, that is wonderful. Thank you. And in addition to that, are there any other questions? I think there was a question about somebody from New Brunswick asking if how they get enforcement in New Brunswick, but I am not sure that you were able to answer that question.
So I can answer it generally. So Transport Canada administers the regulations that govern pleasure craft, but our police partners enforce our regulation. So in Ontario, it's the OPP, RCMP, and the municipal polices. In New Brunswick, it could be the RCMP or and whatever municipal polices are available there with a marine unit.
Okay, another question was, is your presentation going to be available?
I can definitely make it available.
Okay, that would be fantastic. And another question coming in, is the regulation on mandatory PFDs being proposed for adults or only children?
So we will know more when it comes out for consultation. The letter that went out in January, I believe it had 5 scenarios on it. I can't remember all of those scenarios. I know that vessel length was one, age was one, but I'm not remembering all of the details off the top of my head. I can definitely put it in an email to you, Diana, if you want to share it with everybody. Oh, John Gullick, do you remember?
Yeah, and actually, I didn't go through in my presentation, referring to Jeffrey Tasker's presentation to the Standing Committee on Rec Boating, but I did in my article refer to some of that stuff, and SQL has a copy of the article, and they can feel free to circulate it, but they did talk in the January consultation about mandatory wear for any persons 18 years of age or younger, also 14 years of age or younger, mandatory, it was said there that mandatory wear for youth would not be exclusive. In other words, no options would be mutually exclusive during the consultation period. So there's no assumption, there's no decision being made about whether it will be for children, youth, adults of certain ages, or everybody. That will fall from the Let's Talk Transportation consultations. And so that information is in that article. And like I say, it can be circulated to anybody there. I hope that helps answer the question.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. There's a question here saying, is there still the opportunity to influence a decision under Section 7 so that cottagers can ask for a greater distance from shore for all towed wake sports?
I believe that we did get those comments. The distance from shore was definitely mentioned in what we heard. This package has already gone to Treasury Board, so I don't think that you can comment right now. But let me just quickly check something, if you don't mind.
Diana, could I ask a question? I've had my hand up for a while.
Oh, sorry, we're looking at the chats. Yes, please do while Dawn is looking at that. Go ahead, Rupert.
Dawn, could you
Yes.
please explain Transport Canada's rationale? This is regarding floating homes.
Yeah.
To have different regulations in BC than apply in Ontario. and why you are so resistant to a consistent set of regulations across the country regarding floating homes.
I wouldn't say that we're resistant, and that there is a difference, because the float homes, like I was reading from my paper before, the float homes in Victoria Harbour are a little bit different. They're intended to be used in a protected location. They're not kind of floating willy-nilly. They're not anchored offshore. They're connected to the shore with a walkway, direct walkway.
Well, that's exactly what we want to have
right?
happen in Ontario, not have them float around.
Right.
So there is no difference. That's a specious argument. Sorry.
But there are those that are floating and anchored
Not really.
offshore.
We've been able to contain them. And we don't want them floating around. We want them properly regulated and municipally regulated, and construction standards, and paying taxes and connected to services. They can still be located in very attractive locations at marinas or something like that. So just to say because they're floating around, they're different is completely ridiculous. That's exactly what we want to have happen. That is not a logical argument. I'm sorry. We reject that completely.
I think
I appreciate your comment.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, Rupert, is that if they were designated at homes, they wouldn't be allowed to float, and therefore all of the rules that are in BC would then apply to it. So it's sort of a chicken and egg thing.
Well, it's an illogical argument. I mean, that's exactly what we want to have happen here, is not to have them float around, but to be properly regulated. They're a hazard to other boat traffic. They're a hazard to people on board because they are completely unable to deal with any kind of wind and wave action. There's a huge safety issue as well as the environmental impacts and the lack of transport construction standards. They're causing massive pollution from using unencapsulated dock foam at the moment. I mean, I thought the federal government was keen to protect the environment. They're demonstrating in this case that they're not.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, Rupert, and I can empathize with them, and I agree with most of them. Unfortunately, the definition as it stands right now under the Canada Shipping Act, they're seeing it as a vessel.
Okay, wonderful. And I know that, Dawn, you didn't have a chance to completely look into the response on Section 7. I can offer a little bit of a comment here, just that I think by working with the local municipalities, that there can be some input on distance from shore. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. We actually received those comments with distance from shore, and I've seen those. So I know it's in there. It's just a little too late to comment on that 2021 package. Like I said, it's already gone to Treasury Board.
Okay, that sounds great. And I see there's a comment here asking for my email. It's chair@safequiet.com or diana@dunsolis.com. And I'm putting that into the chat for you, Bridget. And with that, are there any final questions? I think we have about 2 minutes left. So if there's another question for Dawn or for Dave, I see Dave's been busy sort of answering some of the questions directly into the chat group. So thank you for that.
Hi, Diana. It's Lance.
Please go ahead.
So, Dawn, I just wanted to declare on the VOR amendment changes for wakeboarding. I know wake surfing is going ahead as a separate schedule. Just for wakeboarding, there was feedback in the consultation, but also in the background. You did not consider a separate schedule as well for wakeboarding, or is that still to be considered under the no tow schedule?
I don't believe that we're looking at a separate schedule for wakeboarding, and I'm not sure that it's included with wake surfing, but I can definitely find out about that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Lance. And Crystal can make note of that so that when Dawn looks into that, we can have Dawn respond directly to you or via through the Safe Quiet Lakes. Okay, that's wonderful. So with that, I have one last comment that says excellent presentations. So thank you for that. And I am going to share my screen as we go to the last little section. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. I think it's been an amazing section on all of the various areas that are undergoing various regulation changes right now, with presentations from Chris on wakes and how that may impact what we need, from Stephen on floating homes, not vessels, on Rob from Decibel Coalition, Dave on statistics and what's going on our waters these days, John on life jackets and a lot of safety tips. And then Dawn sort of wrapping it all up by talking about the various regulations that are currently under consultation. And a special thank you, Dawn, because you had a very long section, and you probably felt a little bit under fire at the end. Because there is a lot of input and a lot of passion that people have around what they want changed on their waterways. And thank you for listening to all of us. And I will echo John's message again, that they do need to hear from every one of you, every association and every individual cottager has a right to go to the Transport Canada website and offer their feedback. So please take advantage of your right to do so, and let them hear what you have to say, and in that way they can better be advised on how they should go forward. So thank you to all of our participants in joining us today with all of your questions. Special thank you to all of our guest speakers. You were amazing. And I'd like to thank or to end with a thank you to our sponsors and our partners. This is a list of them, but doesn't include all of our donors, and any of you who appreciate our work. Please do come to our website and join this group in being part of a solution for making our waterways safe and quiet. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the day.